Everyone, it's Peter from Daydream Nation, and I've got Davy Gallagher back to the channel. How are you, mate?
Very well, thank you,
That,
Peter. Take two, but thank you very much for having me. Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one. While in the waiting for us, isn't it? But yeah, we're covering a biggie today, so looking forward to it, my man.
yeah, absolutely. So we are going to talk about Oasis. So Oasis have reunited the warring Gallagher brothers, back together, and I thought it'd be a good opportunity to talk about Oasis and why this band matters. Um, Hugely popular in Britain, known in these parts, Australia, but in America, not so much. Probably just known as a bit of a one album wonder. We want to talk about the first two albums and the impact this band made with those first two albums. So, Davey, I'll put it to you with that question. Why does Oasis matter?
Well, I mean, the obvious answer is the music matters. They, as you rightly said, have a massive, massive support still in the UK. Every album, every single one they made from the first right through to the last, well, the last as it stands, maybe they will make more if the reunion goes okay. Fingers crossed on that one. But every single one went to number one in the charts. Their compilations, number one in the charts. Their B-side compilation even was number two in the charts. So they just can do no wrong when it comes to commerciality in the UK. Why their music matters is because it really cements an era of, I mean, the music obviously we know now as Britpop, but it cements essentially guitar rock of the 90s in the UK. And it's music that defines an era, whether or not you think it's the best music. I mean, we're not making this video to say Oasis are our favorite band of the period. I mean, I think we're both on record as saying we much prefer other bands. Suede are my favorite of the era. I think Radiohead are yours, from the
Yeah.
UK at least. So we're not coming here to say Oasis are our favorite, but what's undeniable is their impossibly massive impact and how they completely changed the music scene by taking bits and pieces from what had come before, such as the Stone Roses, which Peter and I covered the first time I was on this channel with their stunning debut album, taking a little bit of the Laz, the great band of Manchester fame who only released one album. And then taking earlier influences that we can touch on as well, and bringing them forward into the social realism of the 1990s. It was a different time for music than it was when the Stone Roses released their debut. So it was time for a change politically. It was time for a change socially for young men in particular. Let's be honest, that was Oasis's market, and therefore it was time for a change musically. In quite a similar way to the way punk changes things in the 70s, Oasis changed things in the 1990s.
Yeah, absolutely. So, with their first album, was that a slow burn in the UK, or was it like a meteor? It crashed and everyone just, got on the train straight away.
Yeah, massive, massive hit. Because Oasis had toured up and down the UK for a couple of years. They were well known to people who kept their eyes on gigs, etc. And like a lot of UK bands, the singles start to come out just before the album, and the singles start to do insanely well. And something's in the air, and the album comes out and goes straight to number one. Straight to number one. I mean, definitely, maybe the debut album starts with Rock and Roll Star, although we're not going to go into every track, etc. You know, we really have to mention a few, of course, and the first track in the first album is a real mission statement. You know,
Yes.
tonight I'm going to be a rock and roll star. So, you know, what are the lyrics in my mind? Dreams are real. because tonight I'm a rock and roll star. So it's a statement of intent from the outset that things are going to be a bit more swaggery, things are going to be more forceful, more working class, and things are going to be more raucous. There's no Brett Anderson reflective side on this. There's no Jarvis Cocker witticism. There's no Damon Albarn, Ray Davies kind of tribute feel to it. It's very much an in your face, here we are swagger from rock and roll star straight away to launch the debut album.
And talking language that the average bloke, British lad, would understand. So it's not flowery, because their lyrics have kind of always been sort of criticised, but I
Hmm.
related that they're speaking in a language that a lot of people in from Manchester to Birmingham or whatever, it's street language that they understand. Would that be
Yeah,
fair to say? It's not flowery.
yeah, because Noel, who wrote most of the lyrics, they're very working class people.
Mm,
So I mean, I'm slightly more middle class background myself, but my father was very working class, so I can kind of see both sides of Britpop, where I can identify with the more flowery aspects of what a Brett Anderson would be doing, but then my father's side, I can see the street language, the lingo of Red Clydeside, and how the working class nature of the lyrics comes across, because it's talking not in street level in the way that say rap music would do, not that kind of street level, but just the bloke down the pub.
mm,
The guy in the street getting a doner kebab after a night of clubbing, that kind of thing.
yeah,
Not being massively emotional, but being more emotional than most kind of blokes would be before that. It was very much a different type of rock lyric that had come in. Nobody's going to be sitting with books of Noel's lyrics and studying them like they would great art. Ray Davies, one of the great
mm,
lyricists, Lou Reed, that kind of thing. Bob Dylan, of course, Nobel Prize winner. We're not talking about that kind of thing. We're talking about the perfect lyric to accompany the music,
yeah,
most importantly, and the attitude and the vibe that Oasis have, the perfect lyric for that. And that's what Noel brings to affairs. And of course, in his brother, Liam, you have the perfect delivery of that kind of thing. Because it would be all very well having that street lyricism, but if your front man who's delivering it doesn't have Liam's attitude, it wouldn't work.
yeah. I think the emotional swell is probably the music more than the
Hmm.
lyrics. And, I think that Noel has got a beautiful ear for melody. And that's
Hmm.
the hero of all these songs. Rock and Roll Star is a mission statement. It is a cracker of an opening track. And to me, I think it reminds me of Status Quo. And Status
Yeah.
Quo is a band that comes up again and again and again as an influence, either directly or indirectly, with a lot of their rockier tracks. And Status Quo is that meat and potatoes, four on the floor type of boogie rock, which is an institution in the UK, as you would be well aware, Davey. So I think there's a little bit of that lineage to a British institution, and they've brought it in and modernized it and put their own influences. Yeah, there's Beatles, there's, you know, um, sort of experiences that I have in my lyrics.
Yeah. I mean, I think um, definitely status quo, but that kind of mid-period quo, especially. So before they become, which they have, unfortunately, a kind of novelty. Well, not unfortunately, it's made them very, rich and whatnot, but or did before Rick died. But Francis
Yeah.
is carrying on with the band. And they became very familiar to audiences who wouldn't normally like rock and roll. They became the
Mm,
safe band. But Quo their great album from the early 70s is a hard rock masterpiece.
Yeah,
And they
the
had
mid
a,
'70s, the '70s
yeah.
period. Yes.
So anyone thinking that we're talking about the bouncy happy quo, you really need to go back to the early to mid 70s and listen to Status Quo, and you will hear, as Peter says, that direct lineage. Another band who also became, especially their frontman, a jovial, fun television character, Slade, Noddy Holder Slade. If there's a
Mm.
direct line between Slade and Oasis, they covered "Come Feel the Noise" early on. You can hear as you said, meat and potatoes, wearing a lot of denim. You can follow that lineage straight through. Another that I don't particularly want to name, but he's even got a co-credit because one of the riffs is from him, Gary Glitter. Despite the horrendous crimes the man committed, he was an enormous part of 70s rock music in the UK. And at his best, yes, he did inspire a lot of young musicians, who then grew up and made their own music in the 1990s.
T-Rex. T-Rex is another one.
T-Rex
I hear a bit of Bowie. Yeah, all of these, yeah,
and
influence.
T-Rex, I think, maybe even my favorite T-Rex album, Tanks, which is a little bit heavier. I think that's the one that you'd quote. And as we go into the second album, that's where I think a lot more of the Beatles start to come in, the influence for What's the Story, Morning Glory. Um, you know, um, a lot of the more whimsical nature starts to certify itself, whereas the first album is a lot more rough and ready. It's not punk, obviously, but it's got a kind of punkish attitude and its
Yeah,
bolshiness and its
yeah,
forwardness and its brashness and its production as well.
yeah. A
It kind of
bit
push,
rougher, bit rougher.
yeah, and
Yeah,
pushes that.
absolutely. So the status quo songs, I think, for me on this is Rock and Roll Star. Up in the Sky is definitely a bit of
Hmm.
a status quo feel to it. It was funny, I was listening to Shaker Maker. It's got that wonderful Lennon-esque vocals, but the harmony, the melody line reminded me of "I'd like to teach the world to sing." You know that
Yeah, but
I think they crib, they do crib melodies, but hey, who doesn't? And they just put it into their own world. There's a lot of songs that sounds a bit like Rolling Stones, "Live Forever." That's heavily influenced. It sounds like a Rolling Stones "Exile on Main Street" to
hmm.
me. Um,
Yeah, and Live Forever is one of the songs that, I mean, we're talking about why they became so big and what made them so big. A song like Live Forever is a perfect illustration of that because it's an anthem for people who don't normally have anthems, young, displaced, working class guys. So they weren't being preached to, they weren't being looked down upon. They finally saw a band that looked like them, that dressed like them, with a mod parka, baggy jeans, Stone Island jacket, Levi 504s, a Kangol bucket hat, that kind of thing. Looked like them, dressed like them, talked like them. Even if you didn't have a Mancunian accent, you had a regional accent. You didn't have the Londonness. It was for the outsider, for the regular guy. So for the first time, really, in a long time, you have a musical revolution of an anti-intellectualism almost. Not that. I mean, yeah, if you read a lot of Noel's interviews, especially from the 90s, he slags a lot of his contemporaries for the way they would write, and for being up themselves and pompous. So Noel's intentionally writing these kind of street anthems, but then they go on to become arena anthems and now stadium anthem. Well, for a long time now, stadium anthems. And didn't take that bloody long either. I mean, 1996 they play Knebworth to 250,000 people for 2 nights.
that's phenomenal. That is absolutely phenomenal. I think "Supersonic" for me is the attitude song on this album. This really sums up, I think this would be the track that I would play to the folks in the US and may not have heard of Oasis, and it summarizes probably the attitude because it's got so much swagger. The lyrics are really sort of about being working class, but it's kind of aspirational, where they would rather be in a place that is not where they currently are. It's sort of aspiring to be, up in the stars, and the world is your oyster, sort of thing. Is that what do you think of this song?
Well, yeah, I mean it's self-confidence and self-belief. I mean, how does it start? It's something like I need to be myself, I can't be nobody else, something like that.
Yeah,
And that kind of sums up the appeal of the song, the appeal of the band, the appeal of the album, where there is an FU attitude, if you like, where I'm going to be myself, and I think there's a lot more people out there like me than the press would realize. It turns out there was, and it resonates a lot. Supersonic becomes another anthem for them, where again, a lot of young men would be going to their gigs and hearing music that reflects their identity back at them for the first time, who wouldn't do so if they went to see contemporaries of the band, who,
yeah.
again, no wouldn't call them contemporaries, but bands of the time. And it's got a Beatles-esque feel as well. It's a little bit psychedelic. It's got some good backing vocals from I can't remember his name, but the lead singer of The Real Thing. So it's got a kind of Beatles-esque feel to it, but not as strong as we'd get in the next record. But yeah, certainly a very full-on, self-confident, swagger and anthemic track.
Almost arrogance, but
Yeah,
there's charm, and that's the thing about Liam. He's not the greatest singer, but he gets through on arrogance and charm and just belief, and that's all part of the package. But this song is about how you can make your life to be better than what it is. And I think a
mm,
lot of these songs are very aspirational, that we're working class, but you can be aspire to be a rock star. You can aspire to be supersonic and, believe in the stars. And to me, this is, a perfect starting point for the whole mythology of Oasis.
yeah,
Um, and, those two guys, they're a journo's dream. They're soundbite arama, aren't they? I think
yeah,
Noel. If you don't like his music, folks, just look at his some of his greatest quips. He is the
yeah,
king of put down, and it's just like listening to two guys, wide boys in a pub, shooting the breeze, having a couple of pints, and some of it is very biting. Like the put down he did with Michael Hutchins, that was terrible. He does cross the
yeah,
line, but even though it was accurate, probably, but he sometimes
yeah.
he plays the media like a violin, doesn't he? And this
Yeah.
built the whole mythology of Oasis, didn't it?
So yeah, I mean, this is a massive part of the band's then success is the media appeal. Let's follow Noel around. He's always good for a quote about, you know, Damon Albarn's a C word and blah blah, etc. etc. Um, Start a war that ultimately leads to one of the defining moments of Britpop, which is the who will get to number one battle between Blur and Oasis, which was, I don't think there's been anything like it since. Who needs to get to number one? Is it going to be Blur with Country House, or is it going to be Oasis with Roll With It? It becomes a big media battle. So having these wars in public helps that. Liam's attitude in public is a little bit, on the face of it, quieter because he's not as vocal as Noel, but he'd throw paparazzi's cameras around, etc., etc. And a lot of people took against them, and still to this day think that's all they were a couple of kind of we call them Neds in Glasgow, but Scallies, Chavs, whatever the term is you want to use, which a lot of that comes back to the class issue, almost saying, oh, they should be back on the scheme, the housing estate. You know, they're not good enough to be going to these nice clubs in London. You know, there's a lot of classism that comes into it, really, and it kind of overshadows some of their stuff. Kind of overshadows some of their legacy, I think, in the US. I
Tabloid,
mean,
very very tabloid.
yeah,
Yeah,
when they and it leads to nonsense where when they announce the reunion, for example, a lot of people, including in our community, posted about the reunion just to say they weren't interested. Well, just don't post about it then, folks. It's one of those things, a bit like you two, where just to mention them gets people's back up for, you know, for some of them. Whereas, yeah, a lot of that helps them, a lot of that hinders them with some people. But it was great self promotion at the same time. That attitude that was 100% genuine. There's nothing fake about Noel's quips and whatnot. I'm sure he'd be a little bit more toned down with some of them now, but he wouldn't recant them. He's not a guy who says, "Oh, I was just young and foolish. I don't mean any of that." He meant what he said, and he said what he meant. And I appreciate that. As we were discussing about an unrelated matter, honesty first.
authenticity. He's authentic.
Yeah,
He is authentic.
and that comes across. Comes across.
Yeah. And I think that's a segue into the song Cigarettes and Alcohol. They're wearing their influences on their sleeve in regards to, you know, we get on the
Yeah,
booze, the nicotine and the cocaine. We've got swagger and attitude. And if we want to steal and crib a little bit of T-Rex, why not? 12 Bar
yeah. I
Blue.
mean, it is get it on, isn't it? But it's a great song.
Which in
Again,
turn was inspired by Chuck Berry anyway. So,
yeah, so again, yeah, there's only so many bloody chords, and most music that comes from some kind of version of the blues, as we've discussed on a separate video elsewhere.
mm,
There's only so much that tends to happen with the same number of chords that are used in most pop rock songs.
yeah,
So there is a clear lineage, but you know, I mean, the song is about the appeal of cigarettes and alcohol to repel the banality of a boring existence. So that's something that a Brett Anderson would write about and a Damon Albarn would write about. But what they wouldn't do is present it anything like this. They would go for a clever, insightful lyric, whereas this goes for very basic lyrics, but still quite, you know, in its own way. You know, is it worth the aggravation to find a job when there's nothing worth working for? Good
yeah,
lyric, but
absolutely.
it's not poetry.
Yeah.
It's it's conversational poetry, maybe, which is a
Mm,
completely different thing. But yeah, I mean, it's got, as you said, Chuck Berry's there, you know, Little Queenie, that kind of thing. Humble Pie, a little bit. But yeah, it's a great single. It's an absolute smashing single. I can't remember what it got to in the charts. Let me quickly see if I can see that. I mean, that was one of their early singles. It may have been one of the first two or three actually.
yeah,
The Cigarettes and Alcohol got to number 7, so it was their
yeah.
second top 10. Live Forever got to number 8, which was their first top 10 just before that. But yeah, that was Cigarettes and Alcohol, number 7 in the charts. Probably not the kind of thing you'd release these days. I don't imagine vapes and mocktails would have the same appeal, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, a lot of folk regard this as the masterpiece. I don't quite subscribe to that. I think it's a very good album, but I don't think it's as good as the follow up, which is What's the Story, Morning Glory. Before we go to that album, I just wanted to. I was looking at the charts of 1994 to give folks a bit of a view of what was the musical climate. So you had Soundgarden with Super Unknown, you had Weezer with their self titled album. Pearl Jam had Theology, the Cranberries with No Need to Argue, and The Wonderful Grace by Jeff Buckley. So that's a little bit of a spread of some of the classic albums in 1994 and this album. So, you know, definitely there was a alternative rock. grunge. It was an interesting and fertile musical environment at that in 1994. So you can see it was kind of probably receptive to this type of music, which was old, but on the other end, it was new. In the case of the approach and the swagger, wouldn't you say, Davey?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just why you were saying there because obviously things like Grace, wonderful album, but that wasn't selling millions of copies at the time anyway.
But
I'm
influence, a critical
Yeah,
influence. It was,
but what I'm doing is I'm pulling up the UK version of what you just said just to see what the top sellers were. And yeah, when you look at the landscape, I mean, Blur's Park Life is on there, but a lot of it is, Wet, 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 who Billy Connolly described as pish, 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 which more apt. Pink Floyd, The Division Bell, so, but then it's, Mariah Carey, The Music Box,
oh,
Eternal, a lot of very poppy stuff. I mean, REM's Monsters on there. So, but the biggest selling UK albums in that year, Jimmy Nail, the bloody actors on there, the Three Tenors, E17, the boy band. There's not a lot of great stuff. So, despite the fact that a lot of the great Britpop bands had already started, they hadn't made a lot of movement into the charts yet. So this is
yeah,
really what we're saying here is Oasis are the ones that bring it straight into the mainstream in the way that the Sex Pistols do with punk. Punk didn't start with the Sex Pistols, but who's the ones that got the front page stories? Who's the ones that were able to tour the world and in one album change the music scene? Well, two if you count the rock and roll swindle, but that's a different kettle of fish.
yeah,
So the Sex Pistols do that, and then Oasis do that because you look at the same list in 1995, and all of a sudden half of it is guitar rock stuff.
yeah.
So
So folks, they've actually kick-started it. So what we're saying is that UK needed an oasis. The world, it was waiting for a band like this to bring something that was kind of old but kind of new. Anyway, so the follow-up album, which I think is my favorite Oasis album, What's the Story, Morning Glory, because I think that Noel has really refined, mastered the art of melody. The melodies on this are so sublime. It's almost Lennon and McCartney-esque, that it's kind of sing-songy, it's anthemic, it is built for the stadiums. Now, what's stadium rock? Stadium rock is where the singer can get the microphone and go like that, and the audience can call and response. There are so many melody lines that just are in the head and are built for that sort of interaction between crowd and the band. So, I mean, it starts off with Roll With It. It's got the vocal line, that John Lennon type, Liam singing. And again, it's a little bit quo, isn't it?
yeah, I mean, I think there's a softening down on this record, whereas the first album has, as I said, not punk, but a punkish abrasiveness. The
Hmm.
second album leans much more into the actually, I'm a really good songwriter at the same time, and the clues were there on the first record, but a lot of you might not have recognized them, so I'll put it a bit more obviously on the second. The second album, What's the Story, Morning Glory, is one of the biggest selling albums of all time in the UK. It is if I can just, number five of all time. So it's beaten
17
only,
platinum. 17 platinum. That is
yeah,
phenomenal.
no, no,
Four platinum in the US.
I
That's
mean, nobody counts that in the UK. I don't know about Australia, but nobody talks about platinum. I know that's a thing in the US, but nobody counts them that way. What we tend to do is talk about it was number one for 17 weeks, that kind of thing.
mm,
I don't know, is that a thing in Australia, or do you have the
yeah, yeah, yeah.
platinum? And
No, we don't do
yeah,
platinum, but in
yeah,
America, I guess we're trying to talk to the audience over there just
yeah.
to give them a sense. But number three in the US, which is very tidy, UK number one and Aussie number one, and all these other territories.
So to put it in perspective, it sold more than Thriller. It sold more than Bat Out of Hell. It sold more than Dark Side of the Moon. It sold more than Rumours. I mean, it sold more than any albums ever, apart from Queen's Greatest Hits, ABBA Gold, Sergeant Pepper's, and for some reason Adele's 21, but it's actually just behind Adele, so I'm pretty sure it'll overtake her now with Reunion and, just that kind of music's going to always abide this kind of rock and roll much more than Adele's kind of chanteuse kind of thing. So, I mean, Big doesn't describe how massive this album is, not just at the time, but how much it still is in the UK. It's a cornerstone for music in general. And to me, the way it's sequenced helps that because you get a run of tracks that became iconic singles on the album. I mean, to start with, Roll With It. I mean, you get Hello at the start, but that's kind of fluffy thing. To go with Roll With It, which, I mean, what a single. You gotta roll with it, you gotta take it. It's such an easy song to get stuck in your head. You gotta
Sing
say
along.
what you say, don't
Sing.
let anybody get in you. Yeah, and it'll get stuck in your head the first time you hear it. So Knowles got this. I'm going to write something that's really infectious and catchy, that's something that will really hook us into the popular culture. We've already had a number one album. Let's go for the singles charts as well. I mean, you go roll with it, and then how do you follow up that? Bloody Wonderwall.
That's probably their masterpiece, in my opinion. It is so infectious. I just went to see the Killers last night, and I was walking past the pub, and what was on the jukebox? Blaring out Wonderwall.
Yeah. And
It's everywhere.
every 15-year-old, because I've been this 15-year-old that gets their first acoustic guitar, sits and learns the first chords, and within a couple of hours, they're very badly sitting there going, "Hey, watch this, mum. Today was gonna be the day that I'm gonna throw it
Uh,
back to you."
we could do a
Um,
Rick Beato show to pull that song apart because it's just to do a microscopic analysis because it's so beautifully arranged.
yeah,
Everything is
gorgeous.
everything is in the right place. Even the little shuffle, the drums are not heavy. Just everything is in the right place, and it just defines that Noel has got such an ear for melody, doesn't he?
Yeah, and
That's his talent.
yeah, and it's overplayed, and it's one of those tracks where it's very easy to think I don't need to hear that again. But I think when you hear it in the context of the album, it still has a massive, massive power.
You get sucked in, don't you? So,
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, you said it was on at the pub. I'm assuming everybody there knows it. I mean, certainly if you played that
oh, they
here,
were singing along to it.
yeah, everybody could sing every single word, even if they don't bloody like Oasis. It is by far their most popular song. I think the YouTube hits are about 500 million on the official video, so there'll be loads more that are copying that, and it'll probably be 1 billion. But it is just a masterpiece of arrangement, and starting off much softer than all their other songs in the first record. Kind of shows that Noel's going for a different type of arrangement here, different type of attitude, different type of introspection,
Absolutely. What's a
which
Wonderwall?
which
What's a Wonderwall? I know it's a George
um,
Harrison album, a
yeah, I was
song
going to say
album.
that's I just take it from George Harrison, and then George Harrison did it for the soundtrack to a film, so it's got a nice lineage of being
Mm.
yeah another Beatles reference for them. I mean they had "I Am the Walrus" as a B-side in one of the early singles. Beatles are all over their music,
Oh.
but Wonderwall itself arguably is more familiar. In fact, I don't even think it's arguable. More familiar, certainly in this country, than any song by the Beatles to the living population now. Would I don't think that's debatable because a 20-year-old would be able to sing you every line of Wonderwall. I wouldn't know if they'd be able to do that for I don't know Lady Madonna. You know.
Hmm. I've got to think about that. Yeah, but you're there. You're there. I What Beatles song would be? Let It Be, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe. I mean, yeah, I
Get
mean
Back.
all the
Yeah.
all the songs are absolutely iconic, of course, but they literally have a dying fan base. Which is just age and time, isn't it? And Oasis, again, the only album that outsells them by the Beatles is Sergeant Pepper's in the UK.
Mm,
So this album, and therefore their song, because this is the most famous song, are that iconic that, yeah, I'm pretty sure to most people, I mean, obviously, there's going to be massive exceptions to any rule, but I think for your general punter in the UK, if you just pick an average person, they'll be able to sing you more of Wonderwall than they would of any Beatles song.
yeah. Well, one thing about the Beatles, their cross generational fan base has continued with the
Hmm.
pumping out of their legacy. Like they had the number ones, and then they've had the Let It Be documentary.
Hmm.
In the Apple Corps or whatever, they're very shrewd to keep that machinery going a lot more than say the Stones or the Who or a lot of those other classic rock bands. But I'm not gonna dispute what you're saying because I think it's got validity. I just haven't heard it. Um,
I mean,
Someone would say that.
I think it's the only one I'd say that about. I mean,
Mm,
everybody knows Roll With It. Everybody knows the song that comes up after it, but
mm,
this song, my mother would be able to sing every line of it, and she's in her 70s.
yeah.
Whereas I just don't think that's the case for a lot of young people. And by young, I'm really talking, say, 35 and under, would be able to sing as much of any one Beatles song as they would for Wonderwall.
Is Beatles
And
in high school or primary school curriculum? You know how they teach music? I would imagine kids would be taught Yellow Submarine and all that sort
yeah,
of.
I mean, maybe Yellow Submarine would be the most famous because of that, because it's very catchy and infectious to kids. But
Mm,
yeah, I think that would be in the conversation. Actually, that might be an interesting topic for another video, to be honest. Where
yeah.
we're not talking about the best. We're just talking about the most recognizable. But yeah, don't look back in anger. Following it, I mean, what a run! Roll with it. Wonderwall. Don't look back in anger. In fact, maybe their three most famous songs back to back. What a
Wonderwall
bloody
might
run!
be what Wonderwall might be in the educational curriculum.
Yeah, I'd
It's
imagine so.
It would be. I, I,
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised. So
Um,
indirectly, a lot of those songs, those legacy artists, are kept alive by education in music. Yeah, but that's an interesting topic. We might pursue that. But this
Put it
is
this
it.
way, I still hear it on the modern radio when I'm listening to Radio One. You'd never
Mm,
hear the Beatles, but I still hear Wonderwall.
yeah. What's your classic rock station over there?
Oh, with
Uh,
loads. I mean, we've got, I
which is
mean,
the big one? The big one over
I
there.
suppose Radio 2, probably BBC Radio
Yeah.
2.
Would that be on
Which,
the playlist?
oh yeah, oh yeah,
So this has jumped into classic rock radio.
yeah. But
Wonderwall. Yeah.
rather depressingly, I can put on classic rock radio these days and hear the Killers and whatnot, and I think, oh, Mr. Brightside's 20 years old. How did that happen? So it creeps
Mm,
up on you, doesn't it? But just like the next track, and Don't Look Back in Anger. I mean, that isn't as famous, but it's still massively famous. It's one of these bands who we can say it's one of the least popular singles from the album, even though it's a massive single and everybody bloody knows it because this album was so huge. So Don't Look Back in Anger isn't as famous as Roll With It, isn't as famous as Wonderwall, and everybody still knows it.
it's anthemic and it's got an emotional swell to it, and I think this reinforces that the lyrics are not exactly emotional, but it's the melody. Don't look back in anger, I heard you say, and just with that melody line makes it so melancholy and emotional.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's the first time where Noel comes to the fore. It's the first single with Noel's vocals, and a whole generation say, "Whoa, whoa, they've got two great singers." Because this isn't a case of, oh, right, Keith's going to sing this one, and then Keith's passable at best. Let's be honest. Noel's a brilliant singer, a phenomenal singer.
Arguably better than Liam.
Better than Liam in a classical sense for sure. Although, as Noel said, Liam has the wonderful cross of Lennon and Lydon, the two Johns, which Oasis needed to push on and become
Mm,
Oasis. But Noel has a quality where he's got a much more melancholy vibe to him. And there's the
mm.
famous MTV Unplugged that they did, where Liam didn't show up. You know the story, I take it. Liam didn't show up for MTV Unplugged. Now, any other band would say, okay, we'll reschedule. Oasis went ahead with a gig, and Noel just sang every bloody song.
And he nailed it.
Nailed it.
Yeah,
Absolutely nailed it. And in a completely different way than Liam, obviously.
yeah.
But killed it. Absolutely killed it.
And it's a very typical sort of lyric line where it's looking forward, it's living in the moment, because a lot of the Oasis songs are living in the moment, aspirational, living in the moment, don't have regrets. It's sort of, you know, tough, you know?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you can draw another straight line from the Stone Roses kind of lyrics, Ian Brown's lyrics as well, to this, where, I could imagine Noel doing something like I Am the Resurrection, maybe not with such overt religious connotations to it, but I could easily see some of the Stone Roses stuff being by Oasis. I could certainly hear the Lads being by Oasis, some of their stuff. But Don't Look Back in Anger is the first time where they bring that much more melancholy vibe to them. One of their great album sides is Half the World Away, which will become the theme tune to a massive UK show called The Royal Family, about working class families. So Oasis are perfect for that. And that became a show that was watched by over 10 million people. And they use a low key acoustic no song from the 90s as the theme tune. So it's at this point where you start to really hear the diversification of Oasis, where, okay, they're not massively different. It still sounds like Oasis, but it's a more introspective, more rounded Oasis. You wouldn't have Don't Look Back in Anger on the debut album. There's an attempt here to give you a much more emotional spectrum. I
Yeah,
think you can hear that through that run. Roll with it, Wonderwall, and Don't Look Back in Anger. It's one of the nobody talks about it because in the CD we don't have album sides. But if that was a side one of an album, it would be considered one of the great sides of all time.
absolutely. I'll bring up another song, which is the closer, Champagne Supernova. And this is another example where the melody line is so emotive more than the lyrics. And it
Yeah,
brings you up. I mean, what's a Champagne Supernova? Again, it's probably an aspirational lyric. There's a bit of psych, it's atmospheric, it's melodic. A lot of people have criticized this lyric saying it's a lot of codswallop, but Noel has said it means different things to different people, and I'm in different moods. I might give you a different interpretation or take of what it means. Um, you know, what do you think
well,
of this song?
I think it's. I don't like playing favorites and saying this is my absolute favorite because tomorrow I'm in a different mood and I might feel different. But on any given day, this may well be my favorite Oasis song. I think it's a total masterpiece. A totally brilliant way to end a record. A totally brilliant way to end their live shows. I mean, you can take issue as people did with the. I mean, I remember we played it in the first band that I was in school, and we were reprimanded for singing the lines. Where were you when we were getting high? Don't sing that. Don't sing that. Right, but it's not about that. It's not glorification of being high. It's not cigarettes and alcohol part two. I mean, you could actually argue it could well be a spiritual high. As Noel said, it's not
Mm,
about one particular thing.
mm,
It's a gorgeous anthemic, and Liam, yeah, he's got an abrasive voice, which a lot of people just won't take to. That's fine. But to me, this is Liam's best vocal performance from the more mainstream side of Oasis. There's some B-sides where I think he's even better. People need to hear the Master Plan, the B-side compilation if they haven't.
Oh yeah, that's mighty.
But his vocals here, I mean, the way he sings landslide, just the word landslide, caught beneath the landslide, he adds the hi. It's majestic. It's wonderful vocal phrasing. And although, yeah, Noel doesn't know what it was writing about, Liam picks up on something, so it means something to Liam, and it becomes this gorgeous, perfectly in sync performance from him. Where if you told me that Liam wrote it and it means something important to him, I believe it because he sounds so in tune with what the lyric is. It's gorgeous. It's amazing. It's a breathtaking song, Champagne Supernova. Absolutely
Yeah.
breathtaking.
And it's got a wonderful outro. It's kind of got that Hey Jude, I Am a Walrus outro that
Yeah.
it swells into something that's just symphonic and yeah, just wonderful.
Do you
It's
know what
it's
we're
top
saying
tier,
though?
top tier.
And it wasn't released as a single, which is, weird. But we're in this era of Wonderwall wasn't a number one single. Wonderwall got to number two, and Don't Look Back in Anger got to number one. So we're in this kind of baffling era of some of their best stuff doesn't make it, but it doesn't mean it's not an absolute anthem that everybody knows because people have got the album, so they don't need the single in a lot of cases. So
Mm,
even though the song isn't released as a CD single, everybody knows it and it becomes a radio staple. It's one of the last times I can think of where an album track becomes as famous as any one single on the album, apart from again Wonderwall. The caveat's always
mm.
Wonderwall being bigger than the album. But you'd hear this on the radio right now, the same way that you would hear Don't Look Back in Anger or Roll With It, maybe even more so, because it has a very profound, melancholy, but slightly optimistic feel to it. As you said, it's a bit of a Rorschach test and kind of different people, different things taken away from it. It gets played at people's funerals, for goodness sake. Yeah, stunning, stunning track, which, ooh,
Yeah, yeah. Another thing I want to shout out, we haven't really spoken about the playing on this album, but they've had a change of drummers. And Alan Whitey does the drumming on this album, and he actually swings. There's a lot of groove to the
yeah,
tracks, whereas the first album was a little bit more conventional, a bit more
yeah,
square, but this really has a lot of swing to it. And
yeah.
especially when swing's very important, like bands like the Stone Roses, where there's a bit of a danceability. We covered Primal Scream, danceability.
Mm.
So with this particular album, there's a lot of swing and grooves. It's danceable. But yeah, look, this is the album that was built for the stadiums, wasn't it?
Yeah, I
The
mean,
terraces.
yeah, and Paul Weller's all over it. He plays lead guitar on three tracks. Does some backing vocals on Champagne Supernova as well. So,
Mm,
Paul Weller's endorsing the mod father himself, the king of Britpop. So, there's a musicianship here that wasn't quite as evident on the first album, where it does have that slightly one note vibe because that's what they're going for. There's an attempt here, which there definitely would be on the third album, to expand musically and blow things up into a much more musically literate album. You can definitely hear that here. They don't want to just make the first album over again. They want to do something different. And you're right, Whitey gives it a different feel than his predecessor, but that's always the case with Oasis. The musicianship does get overlooked, whereas Noel's not the best lead player in the world, but he's distinctive. Bonehead, when he was in the band, played some great bar chords. He added a very distinct vibe to the kind of bass of the band, not literally the bass, because that was
mm.
quite gigsy, but the BASE of the band, which Noel would play on top of. Um, Often inspired, of course, again by what's come before, as was said, guitar bands of the 60s and 70s. But yeah, the musicianship's off the scale on the second record compared to the first, I think. And you did say it's the music for stadiums. Really, as we're talking about the first two albums, and I mentioned it already, this is the album that leads them to Knebworth, where after only two albums, 2.6 million people apply for tickets to go see them at Knebworth. That is, at the time, 1 in 18, I think, as the documentary says, 1 in 18 adults in the UK applied for tickets for Knebworth.
So it matters to a lot of people. They're doing a tour of Australia, sold out, five
Yeah,
dates in Sydney. And this band, before they broke up, when they played Sydney, they were playing like the Enmore Theatre, 2,000 to 3,000 seaters. They were kind of like yesterday's heroes. They've had the break, and people have sort of, it's there's interest that's kind of swelled. People
yeah.
are revisiting and thinking, yeah, we'd like to see this band again.
It never happened to them here. They always could play the stadiums after this album, after the second album. That was them. They were set to the very end. Their last albums did get to number one still, but they never had the cultural impact of the first
Mm,
couple, because the album number three, I think, starts to show a little bit of pretension coming into the band, and it becomes a bit too bloated. It becomes a much longer record, where I don't think that it captures the zeitgeist. The third album, Be Here Now, I should say. And
mm,
then the fourth album, Standing on the Shoulder of Giants, it comes out, it's a massive smash hit, but it doesn't catch on in the popular culture the way that, it becomes just another album that's done really
yeah,
well, and then a year later is in bargain bins. But my favorite Oasis album, I mean, probably apart from this, is Heathen Chemistry, their fifth album, which is a brilliant rock record and full of wonderfully low key songs. Where Liam starts to write a little bit, you've got some wonderful stuff. Stop Crying Your Heart Out, Little by Little, Songbird, some brilliant, brilliant songs. But again, I couldn't pretend that that's important to their legacy, because if they just play in these upcoming reunion concerts, which have all sold out, massive stadiums, 50, 60, 70,000 seaters in the UK, if they just play songs from the first two albums, they will not get one single complaint.
mm,
Which really, that's why we're covering these first two, because everything they did after, personal opinion aside, because again, I love album number five, Heathen Chemistry. If they just played these first two albums, that would satisfy everybody that pays to go see them.
100%. And, you know, I'm saying about What's the Story, Morning Glory was built for stadiums, but it's not bombastic. There's a
Mm,
lot of heartfelt songs that are, kind of, they're not like that sort of the bombastic rock songs that you would expect for stadiums. A lot of them are anthemic but very personal, and there's a little bit of introspection that you
yeah,
wouldn't sort of expect from a typical stadium rock concert.
yeah. I mean, we'd stick it on when I was a student, and we'd stick it on a Sunday morning, and it worked perfectly.
Mm,
Just a low key listen, and you take away enough from it listening that way, where it becomes, yeah, it's a gorgeous album. Or you can listen to it with 60,000 others in a stadium, and the songs become these massive anthemic things that take you into another realm.
yeah.
Whereas that doesn't happen with, I don't know, let's say Blur, right? So Roll With It comes out, the chart battle that I mentioned, Roll With It versus Country House. Which one is going to get the massive number one? Great publicity, because obviously it makes both fan bases buy
Mm,
10 copies each, that kind of thing. Blur win. Country House wins. That got number one. Roll With It got number two. But Roll With It is the anthem that means something and gets people going. Country House, 30 years later nearly, it's a bit of a novelty song. It's not important. It doesn't matter. Whereas Oasis, to people, matter. They mean something. They represent a time and a place, an attitude. Not to get too political, but it's time for change. Cool Britannia is coming around. And some of that I hate. I hate the laddish nature of a lot of that culture. The objectification of women that would start with that era, lads' mags, where these models would pose with a football shirt and nothing else, pulling it down and all
Mm.
that kind of. No, I don't like that kind of nonsense. That lad culture, chumbawamba, almost nonsense. I don't like all that. Right.
Mm.
But at the same time, at its best, it represents the change of the guard. We've had 18 years of Tory rule. Something's going to change, and there's something in the air at this time. No, is it Downing Street meeting with Tony Blair, for goodness sake, at parties, and it becomes a kind of yeah, things are looking up. The skies aren't so grey anymore. The cities aren't desolate. We're finally having cities rebuilt in the UK that haven't been touched in decades. They're getting cleaned after all the soot, etc., etc.
A self confidence and self belief in our culture,
Yeah,
your culture,
yeah.
and
I mean,
people talking
Eng-
to them directly in their own language.
yeah. England hosted the Euros in that year, 1996, the
Mm.
year of Knebworth. So there's a real feel that you know, something's happening here, something
Mm.
important. And as we've kind of said about numerous Britpop things we've covered, there's also a feel that, and if people don't care, like in America, for example, it's big enough that we don't care that they don't care. We're kind of just doing our thing here. So
Mm.
they do conquer America for about 10 minutes and then they kind of fade away in America. They have an infamous appearance on MTV, which doesn't go well. Backstage tantrums. Liam was asked to be more interesting on stage. I mean, you see Liam and he just sings with his hands behind his back and straight into the microphone with, that head tilted back thing that he does.
Mm.
So it wasn't a dynamic frontman in that way. And the laddishness didn't translate to America. So the songs did for a little while, and Wonderwall is still a big song in America, but they are, yeah, 90s relics for a lot of people. Oh yeah, yeah, they were good, weren't they? Or in a lot of cases, really, they're coming back. But you just can't overstate their importance, even whether you like them or not. I mean, I could sit here and really criticize them if we weren't, being a bit more optimistic. There's a lot of things to criticize about their music, their personalities, and whatnot. Their lack of musical curiosity, some of the lyrics, some of their attitudes. We could go on a rant, but it's more important to celebrate what's good about things sometimes, while still acknowledging that other side. And Oasis have so much good in their ledger with these first two albums that they can announce a comeback, sell out stadiums for night after night. Millions of people are going to see them in the UK and around the world now. They've announced Australia, I think Asia as well, if I remember right. They're doing
Absolutely. Are you going?
no, because over here the tickets are going for safe to say high hundreds, not just a couple of hundred,
But
high
that's not to
hundreds.
say that you may wing a ticket. I'm pretty confident that you will be going. I'm
I've
sure
seen
something will
I,
happen.
I've seen them three times. So if I never did see them again, I'd be happy enough to have seen them before
Yeah.
the split. I've seen no solo, and I've seen Liam kind of he came on the guest slot. But I've seen the Stone Roses and whatnot, and I've seen a
Mm.
lot. I've seen Suede most importantly. So I'm very happy with who I've seen. If I didn't see them again in a big arena, I mean, I got to see Oasis at the Glasgow Battlelands with about 1,000 people, so very intimate setting.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, we just can't really talk enough about these first two albums. I think especially the second album is the one that people should revisit if they think, oh yeah, did I like them or not? Just give it a bloody listen. Just go back, listen to What's the Story, Morning Glory, and I think you won't be massively shocked at what you hear. It's not going to blow your socks off in terms of I've never heard anything like it. It's not that kind of album, but it's just a very emotional, powerful record, which what more can you ask for really from music?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Davey. This has been a really interesting chat. I thought you're definitely the bloke I want to have on this channel to talk about Oasis and why it does matter. And, I'm hoping to see them next year. Haven't winged a ticket yet, but I will hopefully get one and see the lads get back together. And look, folks, explore those first two albums. That really captures the essence of Oasis, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think Heathen Chemistry, their fifth album. So if people like the more musical side of something like um, uh, Wonderwall, go straight to the fifth album after that. Don't go to the third album because even Noel says that was a big mistake. I think you do album one, you do album two, and then you go straight to album five.
Yeah.
And then the B-side compilation, as mentioned, the master plan. So if people want a sampling of Oasis, then you want these first two albums, Heathen Chemistry, and the master plan. And honestly, you don't really need much more than that. There's some great no solo stuff, but you don't need much more than that to know what you need to know about Oasis.
Absolutely. Thank you, Davey. Please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. Tell us what you think of Oasis, what your favorite album, what's your favorite song. We love reading your comments. I will put a link below to Davey's channel. Lots of great content. I won't ask you what's coming soon because there's so much coming on, but I will share the link and ask people to explore his channel. Lots of content, and also on Sea of Tranquility on the Monsters Den and Review Crew. Lots of wonderful shows on that channel. A lot of shows that will Davey and I will be doing. Some more Britpop. Blur,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, and then
Radiohead.
we should try and find something completely out the wheelhouse that people because every time they see me and you talking, they'll be talking 90s British music again. We need to find some I don't know 1960s prog band from Denmark and surprise people.
We could. Oh, we've done an Italian prog band,
Yes, I suppose so. Yeah,
Goblin.
so there
Yeah,
you go.
check that out. That was a lot of fun. Anyway, all
Yeah.
right. Always a pleasure. See you later, Davey, and cheers. All the best. See ya.
Cheers.